Welcome to TrialSite News Podcast Series. We are excited to have with us today Patrick Girondi, who has been leading a legal fight that some have called a David versus Goliath battle. So Patrick, welcome.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
It's our pleasure. Now, we have watched this situation with your company, Errant Gene Therapeutics, and its legal case versus the trio of Bluebird Bio, Third Rock Ventures, and Sloan Kettering unfold, and we wanted to have you on the show to discuss the story. Today, we will talk about the status of the case, how it evolved into this, what the current situation is, and what you think is the future for Errant Gene Therapeutics. Now, for those of our listeners that may not know the story, here is a quick rundown. After Patrick Girondi learned that his son Rocco had a genetic blood disorder called thalassemia, he embarked on a mission to cure his son and help other young people like him. Patrick, a self-made businessman in the trading pits of Chicago, entered the biotech business. After striking partnerships with his elite institutions, such as Sloan Kettering, he began co-developing an investigational therapy with enormous promise. Along the way, Patrick learned the hard way about seemingly ruthless business practices involving a group of collaborators that included his partner, Sloan Kettering, Bluebird, and Third Rock Ventures. Apparently, Bluebird, with their financial investor partner Third Rock, had the intent to develop a competitive product, and so Patrick's venture had to be removed from the market. What is unfolding in a now publicly available court docket artifacts is a fascinating, as it is disturbing, about a driven father turned healthcare innovator and how the political, financial, and legal systems are misused to create unfair competition. Now, with all that being said, let's start first by discussing the reason you got involved in all of this, to start with, in your son. How is Rocco doing?
My son is doing very well. He transfuses about every 20 days. So that's, anywhere from 16 to 20 transfusions a year. He does iron chelation, which is pills every day to get rid of the iron. He's a lion. He never once in his life, he's now 29, he's never ever said, why me? He's never complained about anything. I have 3 sons, and people very close to us obviously know which son is sick. But people who know us somewhat and not real well aren't even sure which son is sick.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we were very lucky because back in the 90s, early 90s, he was diagnosed in October of 1992. And back then you were scared to death to transfuse anyone because of the AIDS virus and hepatitis C. I worked with a wonderful professor, Susan Perrine, from the University of Boston and San Francisco Children's Hospital of Oakland Research Institute. And she had a fetal hemoglobin enhancer. So it actually stimulated the fetal hemoglobin gene, the gamma globin gene it's called. And my son was able to go without transfusions until he was about 8 years old. And by that time, they had discovered the HIV antibodies, or anticorpi, as we say in Italy. And so the blood was safe. So my son saved about 6 years of blood transfusions because of this very early gene therapy, which actually was stimulating genes to produce it.
That's amazing. Wow. And now that he's on his transfusions, how's that affecting him?
Well, I mean, every patient is different, obviously. Like I said, I'm very lucky. My son is he's just an exceptional patient. Had it have been one of my other 2 sons, I'm not sure how it would have gone. But, life expectancy is in the early 30s, even though we do have people now that are, arriving at 50 years of age sometimes.
Right.
But life for him is good. For most patients, it's not quite as good. Most patients don't work full time, at least, and their lives are much more compromised. Rocco just kind of doesn't allow his life to be compromised. I guess it's the best way to say it.
Well, that's amazing. Well, we wish him all the best, and you as well. Now, before we get into the details of the legal case, I would first love for you to share more of your experience co-developing the investigational therapy to help your son and others like him. What was it like to be involved in pioneering research?
Well, my case, I think, is kind of interesting because I didn't graduate from high school. And I ended up with some incredible researchers and collaborate still with centers like St. Jude, Memorial Sloan Kettering, of course, University of Illinois, San Matteo and TGET in Italy, the Molecular Center of Thessaloniki, King Khalid Hospital in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. A lot of good people. deal with incredible researchers, Chris Ballas, Leah Yanaki, Nika Capolini. Of course, nobody will know all of these names, but these are the hidden heroes. These are the people, the Stefano Rivellas, the Michelle Settlins, the Isabelle Riviere. These are the stars. These are the researchers that are out there working very hard to save people's lives.
Now, what are some of the things you're really proud about that?
Well, over the years, when my son was diagnosed, I basically promised the Lord, I said, God, get me through this, and I promise that I'll dedicate the rest of my life to these orphan diseases. Of course, when he was diagnosed, I didn't know what an orphan disease was. I didn't know what thalassemia was, sickle cell disease, which is thalassemia's cousin. And over the years, we've worked with many orphan diseases. We helped find a drug in China for a person in South Africa. We were able to get him that drug so he could die in peace. We had a baby in Romania misdiagnosed with G6PD. I worked with Professor Lucia Luzzatto in figuring that all out. And the mother who thought that she was going to lose her child by the time he was a year old, instead was able to realize that it was a misdiagnosis.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, it's wonderful stuff. I'm just so lucky to be involved with wonderful people and every now and then being able to really make an effect. I worked a lot with Tracy Van Houten and his wife, Jen. They founded NOAA's Foundation, which is a foundation that deals with Batten's disease. They lost Noah and Lane, both when they were about 14 years old. And as a matter of fact, the family in 2016 called me up. They live outside of Chicago, and they said, Pat, come, we have a Christmas gift for you. And they gave me an original Versace jacket. One of the things that I do is I sing and perform my own music. And they asked me, at that time, Noah had passed in June of 2016. And they said, we want you. We know you're going to Italy and you'll be doing Christmas concerts. And we'd like you to wear this jacket and sing for Noah.
That's really cool.
2.5 years later, unfortunately, they sent me an email and said, now will you also sing for Lane? But you know what? I'm just so lucky to be surrounded by so many wonderful, wonderful people, doctors, even sometimes lawyers are incredibly important. Obviously, it's just been a wonderful trip for me.
Well, and it's a fantastic thing to be able to affect people's lives in a positive way. Even say in the case of the NOAA's Foundation, where there's a tragic undertone, you're involved in helping people, and that's as noble as it gets.
Yeah, I mean, again, me, like I said, I'm kind of I don't consider myself bright or anything like that. I consider myself a very lucky guy. Like I said, I didn't graduate from high school. I certainly had a wonderful life as a child, very interesting, very colorful. And I've really been lucky enough to be surrounded by incredible, wonderful people. And in 2010, my tiny company, Errant Gene Therapeutics, was able to deliver the first commercial batch of gene therapy for thalassemia and sickle cell disease. And it was an incredible feat. And
that is amazing.
One of the most proud things that I've ever done.
Now, bringing it back to the story that we're talking about, when did you first realize something was amiss with MSK and your working relationship?
Well, first of all, there's always something amiss. Whenever you're working so close together with an organization, there's always some things that don't go well. They need to get research to you. They were supposed to get it in by April. Instead, it doesn't come until May. You are supposed to write them a check, and instead of it getting in May, it gets in June. There's always things that happen. But slowly but surely, I would say after 2015, I realized that there was really something wrong. And that's because we had a number of people, a number of companies, BioMarin, Ultragenics, Sarepta, Sigma Tau, who were looking to do a deal with Memorial Sloan Kettering to push the project forward, and they rejected all of these offers.
Oh, wow. Now, why did you pay the $400,000 to MSK knowing you were not in breach of the contract? Did you feel like it was a David versus Goliath situation?
Well, so I made my money trading at the Chicago Board of Trade, Chicago Merck, Chicago Board Options Exchange. And, when you're a trader, your word is your bond. And you kind of get used to that. You say I bought 100 or I bought 10 or I sold 100 or I sold 5. And that's pretty much the way it is. And I've always been a guy that had put a lot of faith in words. And we were told by Memorial Sloan Kettering that the project was late for sickle cell disease. It was by no fault of our own because we took the project over in 2005. They claimed that it was ready to go into patients, and it certainly wasn't. And so they said that we didn't need to pay the licensing fee for the sickle cell disease part of the license, Field B. They delayed it basically. And then finally in December or November of 2010, they demanded the $400,000 payment for the Field B licensing. And you know what? It was in the contract that we should have done it. It was our fault that we didn't get it written, that they were delaying it or waiving it. And so we decided to pay it.
That makes sense. Now, as someone whose child is ill and needs a cure or at the very least medicine to help the illness, how do you move forward, how do you move this forward to a successful completion?
Well, today there's Bluebird Bio has a vector, and that's an incredible story because the Michelle Settlin vector, which was the EGT vector or is the EGT vector, was basically invented in 1989 by Michelle Settlin. And then another scientist, French scientist, Philippe Labouche, in 1990, basically, according to Michelle Settlin, went around his invention, made it a tweak, made a small change, and started with another gene therapy. In 2000, I met Memorial Sloan Kettering's scientist, Michelle Settlin, and he had published in New England Journal that he had saved 5 generations of thalassemic mice. And I read everything that I could, just like I read everything that I could from the time my son was diagnosed. And I realized that he had the cure. So we basically took that forward. And then in 2010, Third Rock Ventures, a financial group from Massachusetts, bought our competitor, which was Philippe Labouche and Genetics, the French company. And they approached us to buy us. I told them I wouldn't do a deal with them unless they guaranteed that they would use our product because our product is more natural, and we believe safer. Right. Then they wanted me to sign a CDA or a confidentiality agreement, and I refused to sign it because if you think that there's a good chance of you making a deal, there's no sense to do that. And then things fell apart. That was October 9th. I refused to sign the confidentiality agreement, and by October 19th, we were in a world of hurt.
Gotcha. Now, how did you feel when the court judge made all the materials public?
Well, it's kind of a crazy thing. So from 2015, when we finally got tired of waiting around and we asked Sloan Kettering to give us the product back, and they refused, and so the case mounted, a judge put a protective order on the documentations that Memorial Sloan Kettering and Bluebird Bio gave to us. And they shoved everything into those documentations very abusively. And finally, the judge on August 19th, or August 26th, actually, said that all of those documents we're able to use. And I kind of felt like for, 4.5 years, I was like in a sword fight without a sword.
Oh, wow.
And all of a sudden it was like Excalibur is released. And now we have all of these damaging emails and all of these documents that prove exactly what we thought had happened.
And knowing that, do you believe that they have stolen your research and therapy?
Yes, they have without a doubt profited from our technology.
Wow. So what made you ultimately decide to fight this battle?
Well, we asked Memorial Sloan Kettering to give us the product back in 2015. I believe that at that time I had backers. I had R.W. Baird, Wedbush, Oppenheimer Bank, all willing to support EGT if we got the project back and find the money that would be needed to continue with the clinical trials. Clinical trials at Sloan Kettering went very slow. They treated a total of 4 patients. The fourth patient they treated in 2015 with a vector that was made in 2009. Wow. The researchers at Sloan Kettering wanted to make new vector in 2013 because the technology in manufacturing of vectors between 2008 and 2009, when we made ours, till 2013 had really leaped forward. And Michelle Settle, the Memorial Sloan Kettering researcher, was convinced that under new manufacturing process that our vector would be 25 to 40% more efficient. It's kind of like, I guess, the Coca-Cola was invented somewhere around 1900, and it's the same recipe. However, the way they make it is a lot more efficient, and it's the same thing for vector technology.
Now, what is some advice you would give another Patrick, so to speak, starting out down the same path to find a cure?
Well, you have to be a common sense guy. So when I was a kid in Chicago, me and my buddy Davey Polenic, we shoe shined up and down 47th and 51st Street. I think I was about 7 years old when I started. And we'd go every Friday and Saturday up until I was about 12 when I started washing tables and bussing tables at an Italian restaurant. But you have to approach it from common sense. You can't look at it and think that you're going to be able to do things the way everyone else does things. So, for example, I have never taken a paycheck. My president, Sam Salmon, who's been the president of EGT since 2009, has never taken a paycheck.
Oh, wow.
You have to do things differently, and you have to look at things kind of like a child, and you have to challenge every single thing, even things that are taken for granted as being the way to go. One of those things, for example, is they say, oh, it cost $1 billion to make a new drug in all of these years. And there's no doubt about it that creating a drug or making a drug can be very expensive. Mm-hmm. However, it doesn't have to be that way. So if you don't have a CEO who's, the Bluebird CEO last year got $24 million in compensation. At the same time, they raised the price from $700,000 or $800,000, which I thought would have been the fair price to start out with, and then spiral it down. They jacked the price up to $1 million. Well, when you have your investors raking in, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars and getting out of their stock options, et cetera, people don't realize that. But that all goes to the bottom line one way or the other, and it just doesn't have to be that way.
So on that same note, then, what are some things that they should look for, pitfalls to avoid, like in this case with $1 billion that you don't need to spend?
Yeah, well, so the first thing that you have is PubMed.com. It's probably, for me, the greatest site in the world. And over the years, I've been able to help so many people just using PubMed.com, which is, the National Institute of Health website, where you can go in and you can just go in there and see what are the latest experiments to do with your disease. As a matter of fact, I was working on it yesterday for a carcinoma, squamous carcinoma, I think it's called. Mm-hmm. And you go in there and you see what centers are working on it. The most important researchers are usually first or last, and then it goes to the second, and it goes to the second last. These are the least, or it gets less and less important or prestigious, or supposedly the people had less and less to do with the work. So if you've got 15 doctors mentioned, the number 7 or 8 are usually the least ones, important ones. They're all important, but so you basically then get the centers and you start making phone calls. You start sending emails. These researchers very often are in universities or at NIH, and they're looking for your support. They're looking for your help. And instead of waiting for the large pharmaceutical companies to go and find them, which is what I did, actually, I found Michelle Settle. And in 2003, when Memorial Sloan Kettering was abandoning that project, at least that's what Michelle Settle told me, we picked that project up and we took it forward. And then before you know it, we didn't think that it was ever going to be anything. We didn't do it necessarily for money. We took our investors in and we thought we'd get them a great return eventually, and they did it for the right reasons. Right. But, you have to roll up your sleeves. A pharmaceutical company, they're hiring, 5 guys and they're PhDs, and that's all great because we need PhDs as well. Mm-hmm. And they're talking to people, and to researchers, and they're reading documents. But I found that 5 minutes alone with a researcher will give you all that you need. Because what you really need with a researcher is that you can trust him. And very often it's not that they'll lie to you, but they won't tell you the truth. I've been very lucky. I've had wonderful relationships with researchers like John Tisdale at NIH, Aurelio Maggio, Franco Locatelli, Nika Capolini, wonderful people who, when you look in their eyes, they look back, they're not hiding anything, they're being very sincere, and for the most part, very honest. And these are the things that a parent needs to look for. Just go in there, PubMed, my son has this disease. You go into PubMed.com, you try to figure out who is doing the most recent articles and the best work, and you go in there and you sit down and you talk to them, and that's what you need to do, and that's how you get started.
Oh, that's excellent. So PubMed.com. Gotcha. Now, for you, how do you pick up from here, and where do you go next?
Well, we have the court case that goes on. We're filing against Nick Leshley and Third Rock Ventures. We already filed against them in Massachusetts. Massachusetts has 93A, which works kind of like a state RICO. I really believe that the behavior of these people is abominable and criminal. And, for me, I've invested the last 27 years of my life in this. Yeah. The biggest damage that they've done to me is when my son Rocco was diagnosed in 1992. In 1993, I already started a pharmaceutical company called Emerging Pharmaceutical Technologies. In 1995, I was partners with John Walton, Sam Walton's son, for 9 years. Now, John Walton's son had a Wilms tumor, arginine butyrate, the drug that helped save my son Rocco. Had a application for Wilms tumor, and me and John became partners, and we're partners for 9 years. The Walton family, Walmart family we're talking about, invested $20 million into this. So I was very good at what I did, and what the biggest damage for me personally is all of this is I released the project back to Memorial Sloan Kettering in 2011, thinking that they were going to go crazy, thinking that I gave it back to them because they didn't have a big enough piece of the pie. Ends up they do a backdoor deal with Bluebird and Third Rock Ventures. The whole project gets sabotaged, basically, and they wasted 8 years of my life. In these 8 years, I really believe that I could have made a difference in other people's lives. I think that I'm a neat manager. I have the same relationships and the same team that I put together in 2000. Even people like Susan Perrine, we're talking about 1992 that I met her. And so for me to go forward, I'll try to take the damages that I get in the lawsuit. The judge and or the jury will decide whatever that is. I believe that we will win, and I will continue on the road. There are other vectors out there. I really believe in our vector. I'm not sure how that's going to work out. If we own 50% of the upside of it, but Memorial Sloan Kettering controls it. I have no idea what Memorial Sloan Kettering has in their mind to do. They're indemnifying Bluebird even for wrongful actions, and it's crazy. It's a not-for-profit who is indemnifying a for-profit, only against DGT, by the way. These documents came out August 26. There's some wonderful people at Memorial Sloan Kettering. There's no doubt about it. But there are some bad people at Memorial Sloan Kettering. We saw 2018, Charlie Ornstein and Katie Thomas at the New York Times and ProPublica wrote 4 or 5 articles. As a matter of fact, on December 31st, Sloan Kettering, if you're in scandals, a lot of those people that were involved in those scandals are still at Memorial Sloan Kettering, which kind of confuses the heck out of me. Wow. But your question is what we will do. You know what? We're going to dust ourselves off, and we're going to get right back in there, and we're going to fight for patients, which is, by the way, what pharmaceutical companies are supposed to do. The pharmaceutical companies aren't about, the CEO making $10 million a year, and then all of the funds going in there and getting their money back before a company even has a product. Yeah. For me, this is kind of not the way capitalism is supposed to work. Of course, I'm a trader, so I'm really a capitalist. But I always also say that capitalism without a socialistic heart doesn't work real well. But you know what? I'm a true American. I believe that we have a lot of wonderful things going on in our country. And I want to get back in there like a true American and sacrifice myself and my life for the patients that we love and that my investors love and that our researchers love.
Makes sense. Thank you so much for talking with us today, Patrick. This has been an enlightening experience, and I know for us, we'll be keeping our readers and listeners and viewers up to date on how your story progresses. And for those of you in the audience who want to learn more, errantgene.com, which is ERRANTGENE.com, is a great place to pick up more news on this and also on your work, Patrick. And then, of course, TrialSite News will be keeping up on the story as well. And links will be provided in the description below. You can also find TrialSite News on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. And the links will be in the description below. And thanks again for joining us today, Patrick. We really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you so much, Adrian. And this morning I was having coffee with an old Italian guy, and he gave me a phrase in Italian. He knows all about my fight, and I just would like to translate the phrase into English, and I think it's a wonderful phrase. And,
yeah, go for
it is that sunset is not the end of light, but it's the birth of dreams. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's our pleasure.